Most of you, if not all of you, will be entitled to what's called a postgraduate open work permit. I would say the most natural pathway towards permanent residency is upon graduating, apply for this work permit no matter what, whether you plan on becoming a permanent resident or not. If you intend on staying in Canada and working, I mean, if you plan on studying some more, then apply for another study permit. But if you plan on staying in Canada and working, I encourage you all to apply for what's called a postgraduate open work permit. This will allow you to work in Canada for any particular employer, given some conditions depending on what sector you want to work in. So if you want to work in, education, there may be certain other, or in healthcare, there may be other requirements. But for the most part, open work permit means you can work for anyone in Canada. Now, again, I'm not here to talk about like a whole immigration background, but just so you understand, there are different statuses in Canada. And the two I want to talk about is temporary resident versus permanent resident. So all of you who are here currently as a student, you are temporary residents in Canada. And if you're here listening to this presentation, it's possible that you're interested in becoming a permanent resident of Canada. Permanent residency will lead, if it's something you're interested in, down the road to becoming a Canadian citizen. Okay, to become a permanent resident, you have a lot more rights and things available to you that you don't right now as just a temporary resident. So it's a very desirable status to obtain, and that's why you're all here listening about it. So what I'm going to talk about is rural and northern immigration pilot, and just so you understand, this is a permanent residence pathway. So it's not about being a worker per se, or as a temporary worker. It's about becoming a permanent resident in Canada. So Alex, if we can go to the next slide, please. Perfect. So yeah. So this is just a very brief background of why they developed this particular pathway. Typically speaking, historically, most people who settle as immigrants, so when we talk about immigrants in the context of this presentation, it's people who become permanent residents. 4 to 5 new immigrants settle in Canada's 10 largest cities. So there's a real difficulty in smaller communities to attract and retain foreign workers and then people who want to become permanent residents that remain in those communities. So back in 2019, we started RNIP, or the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot, which is a way for smaller communities to really have a way, like more of a say on who they can have come to their communities and apply for permanent residence. We have a population growth issue here in Canada. More people are retiring and getting older versus people who are, having families and having babies. So we really need to supplement our population, especially our workforce, using immigration, which is really a benefit to all of you who I'm speaking to today. So if we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so what makes this different? Eventually, we may have someone, it won't be myself, but someone, speak to you guys, whether it's virtually as a presentation or maybe come and visit you once the travel restrictions allow, to talk about different pathways towards permanent residency. So there's certain terms you may be familiar with, particularly something called express entry or the provincial nominee program. Those would be kind of the typical pathways. I'm going to go backwards a little bit. I'm talking only about economic pathways. There are other ways you can become a permanent resident, and those are what we call compassionate grounds. Most common would be like family sponsorship, and then on a lesser scale, refugees. But what I'm talking about are economic pathways. And all of you being students will have access to certain economic pathways, whether it be RNIP or others. And again, I'm going to talk about RNIP. What makes RNIP different compared to the others you've heard of is it's a community-based pilot that really is targeting, like I mentioned, the attraction and settlement on a very local level. So, this is about I'll start by saying, if you have no intention of living in Sudbury after you graduate, then this is not the pathway for you. You will have other pathways, but this is really meant for people who plan on spending, their postgraduate years in Sudbury. Okay, it's community driven and responsive to local economic development needs, which Alex will speak to. So it'll all of our programs are really based on a job offer. From a federal level, which I'm going to talk about soon, we have certain requirements that say you need to have a job in place. But Alex may have even more requirements on a community level saying, oh, this job has to be within a certain sector, or this employer has to be a certain type of employer. But Alex will speak to that following my presentation. Again, like I mentioned, it's focused on retention and economic independence of newcomers. I mentioned already, it's complementary to other federal and provincial immigration initiatives. So this is only part of the solution. It's not the only solution. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Also, I'll say following this, I have no issues if Cambrian shares this deck with the students. So that's fine. So this is just a little flow map of how this particular process goes, okay? So you've graduated, you're interested in becoming a permanent resident, you think that this RNIP pathway is the best pathway for you. So you would approach your community economic development organization, which in this case is, Alex is here representing Sudbury, and you say, I need a recommendation, because without that recommendation from Sudbury, there is no applying for permanent residence, okay? So you apply for a recommendation. Sudbury has a committee that reviews your application for the recommendation. If they decide you're a good fit, you receive this recommendation, and it's with that recommendation, along with the other, what we call eligibility requirements that I'm going to talk about shortly, that you would apply to us, IRCC, for permanent residence. And then in due time, hopefully within less than 12 months, your application would be to have a decision rendered upon it. And then you become a permanent resident. And then Sudbury welcomes you with open arms. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is really what you need to have in order, even before you apply to for a recommendation, you have to make sure you have a few things, requirements that you meet. So there is no sense in applying for a community recommendation, which you can see is the number 7 thing, before you have the other. Now, some of you, so here it says there's 7 eligibility requirements, but you'll see that really, well, the 7th one really depends on receiving that recommendation from Sudbury. And then some of those other 6 you would be exempt from, and I'll talk about that shortly. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, I'll also say that remember I was talking about economic pathways, almost all, if not all of our economic pathways have a certain level of these requirements across the board. So all economic programs will have an education requirement. In this case, for you guys, as long as you complete a program at Cambrian, you would satisfy the education requirement. Okay. If for whatever reason you didn't graduate from Cambrian and decided you wanted to apply, you would have to prove to us that you have the equivalent of Canadian high school. I'm not going to really dwell on this piece so much because I'm assuming you're all going to graduate. So you would satisfy that Canadian credential requirement. But in case you didn't, you would then have to do a bit of an extra step and request from an organization to have your, let's say, high school diploma, or even maybe you attended university or college in another country. You'd have to have that assessed against what Canadian criteria are. So even like someone who's graduated from Harvard who wants to apply for permanent residence, it's not enough for them to say, I graduated from Harvard. They need to submit their Harvard diploma to one of these agencies so that that agency can now say, yes, this diploma is equivalent to Canadian bachelor's degree. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. But like I said, I'm not going to dwell on it too much, because even if you completed like a 1-year diploma from Cambrian, that would satisfy the education requirement. Okay, I think that's pretty clear. So if we can go to the next slide. Okay. Okay. Our program is really based on you need to have a job offer from an employer who does their business in Sudbury, right? So it's a Sudbury-based employer, okay? And they're going to offer you a job. Now, that job is going to have a title, and it's also going to have what we call a NOC code. So it's a National Occupation Classification, code. And those jobs are divided into different skill levels. Okay, so, and you will become very familiar with NOC codes and skill levels if this is kind of an avenue or pathway you want to pursue. So here on the list, and again, I know this is talking about language, but it's important that you understand the concept of NOC codes before I get into the language requirement. So a NOC D is I would say like an entry level type job where usually the training you receive can be on the job training. NOC C is what we call an intermediate skill job, where usually you need to have some sort of education background. NOC B, A, and O are higher skill jobs, where usually you would probably need some, post-secondary education or college education, and particularly like NOC O is more of a executive positions or managerial positions. NOC B is higher skill. NOC A are professional level, so like doctors, accountants, those sort of things would be NOC A. Now, I'm going to come back to what I really want to talk about is the fact that you need to have a language proficiency. The way we score language, there are 4 tests, official language tests you can take. There are 2 available for English, if that's the official language you want to be tested in, and 2 available in French. They all have different scoring systems, but we also have a chart that shows what the score is. For example, there's a test called an IELTS score that equivalents or that equates to what we call a Canadian language benchmark. So all that to be said is if the job you're being offered is in NOC level D, you would have to have a 4 Canadian language benchmark. If I'm going to talk about language a little bit more, all tests score you in 4 different categories. There's like oral presentation, there's reading, there is reading comprehension, there's writing, and there is speaking. I'm missing one. Anyways, there's 4. When I talk about the Canadian language benchmark, you have to have at least a 4 in each one of those 4 categories. So a lot of these tests will also give you an average score. We're not interested in the average score. So you can have 10s all across, but in the one area you may have a 3. You would not qualify for that 4 language benchmark, even though your average might be 6 or 7. So just keeping in mind when we're talking about the Canadian language benchmark, it's in each one of those categories. Okay? And as you can see, as the skill level of the job being offered goes up, the higher language you'll have to obtain. Okay? I also would refer you all to our website if you have any kind of questions about, what is this Canadian language benchmark? How can I get tested? And so on and so forth. Our website will really have all that information for you and also give you links to the companies or organizations that do the testing. I think you're somewhat fortunate. Sudbury's, in terms of our RNIP communities, you're actually our largest community in terms of population. So you are fortunate in that often, at least I know for English testing and probably French, they come around often to do those tests, whereas some of our other more remote communities often will have to travel to Sudbury to get tested for language. Okay. Oh, the other thing is a lot of things we're going to talk about have expiry dates. So in this example, your test scores for language have to be less than 2 years old on the date IRCC receives an application for permanent residence. So Alex will be, or Alex's group will be checking that you have valid language scores, but it's not just enough that they're valid when you ask or apply for a recommendation, but keep in mind those results have to be valid when you apply to IRCC. So I would say if they're almost about to expire and you haven't applied for a recommendation yet, you may want to consider getting a new language test, because there won't be enough time for you to go through the recommendation process and then get your application into IRCC on time. So, I mean, a good rule of thumb is make sure you have between 3 and 6 months left of validity on your language before you apply for a recommendation, to give yourself enough, time to know, oh, they're still going to be valid when I submit my application to IRCC. Okay, so we've talked about the language requirement. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, settlement funds. I'm not going to worry about this too much. Okay, keeping in mind, this program is open to applicants who are coming from abroad. People who are coming to Canada straight from abroad without going to school first and without working here will have to prove that they have a certain amount of money in the bank so that they can, get themselves set up when they arrive in Canada. You may all well be aware that Canada right now, with our travel restrictions and our quarantine requirements, when people come into Canada now, they're still required to quarantine 3 days in a hotel and then, complete the quarantine in the city that they're going to. And when people are like, well, how do they expect me to quarantine in a hotel? In this case, people coming from abroad would have to prove that they had funds anyways. So that would be our answer. Well, you said you had a certain amount of funds, and that's what they are. They're settlement funds. They're enough kind of buffer or security to know that you have enough money to get yourself started. Now, all that being said, if when you apply to IRCC for permanent residence, you're already working with your presumably, postgraduate open work permit, you will be exempt from requiring these settlement funds. So again, not going to really dwell on this slide too long because my assumption is that most of you will be working, so you won't need to prove that you have these settlement funds. Okay. The only thing I'll show is if it's just you, that's the $8,900, and then the amount of funds you would require in Canadian dollars does go up with every dependent. So meaning and what we call dependents are either a spouse and children. Okay, so it's actually a good important concept for immigration that when you apply for permanent residence, whether it's RNIP or any other pathway, you can include a spouse, so a common law partner or a wife or a husband, and your children to also become permanent residents at the same time. But it does not include parents or grandparents or aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters. So when we talk about dependents from a immigration permanent residence perspective, we're only talking about spouses and children. Okay, if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so like I said, the really, if you were to say, I'm interested in this pathway, the first thing you really want to make sure you have is a job. The easiest way is to actually be working for someone. But if you're not, and now you have this postgraduate open work permit, you find a job and start working in that job. And then you ask your employer, hey, would you be willing to support me with a job offer with respect to this pilot, the rural and northern immigration pilot? And normally an employer would, hopefully want to support you, and they just fill out a form that says, yes, I'm, telling you that this person is going to be working for me or is working for me. This job is full-time, it's non-seasonal, and it's permanent, it's indeterminate. So contract jobs would not qualify for this program. We have to know that there's no end date. It's not like, oh, I'm going to give you a contract for a year. Unfortunately, those types of jobs wouldn't qualify for this program. We want to know that the employer is willing to keep you on with no end date. Okay? The wage of the job has to lie within the wages on a job bank, on a Canada job bank. So for example, and we have a link here, is like if you went to, it's not that, I don't know, will it work? We could try. Why don't we try it? Is it going or no? I don't think it's going. Don't worry about it. That on that website, oh, we could. Okay, so why don't we put in, I don't know, plumber, just as an example. And we search and we go to plumber. And if we scroll down and we're going to go to Ontario, and what are you, northeast region, right? So if you were to apply as a plumber, you have to make sure that you're at least making $17 an hour. If the employer said, no, I'm going to offer you a job as a plumber for $16 an hour, that job offer unfortunately would not qualify. Okay. Usually it's not a problem, but just be aware of that you have to meet a certain threshold. But it doesn't have to be the middle. It has to be within the range or even higher. We're not going to say, oh, you're making too much money. So in this case, plumber, northeast region has to be at least $17 an hour. So let's go back to the original slide. Perfect. So this particular slide is actually talking about the job offer and about work experience. Okay, so with every job you get, we do have a qualification where it says you need to have experience in that skill level. So for example, plumber, which was a NOC B skill level, if you're being offered a skill level B job, you need to know that you have experience of at least a year or 1,560 hours in, not necessarily as a plumber, but in a job that is either skill level B, which plumbing is, or one below, skill level C, or one above, NOC A. Okay. That being said, if we could, and then the only difference is if you were being offered a job in NOC D, so the lowest skill job there, your work experience would have to be in the same job. So if I'm being offered a NOC D job as, let's say, a warehouse laborer, I have to have experience as a warehouse laborer. It can't just be any other NOC D job. Okay, but all that to be said, because hopefully you're going to be graduating from a 2-year program or higher, you may be exempt even from needing this work experience requirement, which is quite beneficial to you guys graduating from a Canadian designated learning institution in the area. So I hope you understand the work experience, because you may need to have work experience. So if you're graduating from a 1-year diploma, for example, you would still need to prove that you have work experience. And often we'll get, does Cambrian offer 1 year? I don't even want to get into it. They do, yeah. So you may get questions like, oh, how about if I have 2 1 years? Unfortunately, we don't accept 2, a 1 and a 1, as we call it. It would have to be at least a 2-year program or longer. So if we can go to the next slide. So just to recap, and here it's more about the experience. So I'll talk about work experience, which I already did without showing the slide, and then we're going to do a bit of a kind of a summary up to this point. So the work experience must have 1 year work experience acquired either in Canada or overseas within the last 3 years, okay, of applying again to IRCC. So I've graduated, but maybe I've been working part-time while I was going to school. And since I got out of school, I worked for another 8 or 9 months, and then I added up and I have more than 1,560 hours, and I've started more than a year ago. I would satisfy my work experience, provided that it was in the right skill level based on that chart I just showed you before. Here it says must be full-time, but then in brackets or part-time equivalent. So it's really about meeting those hours within the last 3 years. So originally, just so you understand, the ministerial instructions of the program said that this work experience had to be continuous. We no longer require that. So a recent public policy allows candidates to meet the work experience requirement where they've accumulated a year's worth of work experience, as opposed to obtained it in a continuous fashion. So you can, if within the last 3 years you worked for 6 months, then you took a 2-month break and then worked another 6 months, that work experience would certainly qualify you for that particular eligibility requirement. You can't include self-employed work. If you work here in Canada, we need to make sure that you are allowed to work So if that work was done when you didn't have a study permit that allowed you to work or didn't have a work permit that allowed you to work, we will not include, well, because you're basically breaking the rules. You were working what we call unauthorized. So just make sure if you're submitting work experience that you've done in Canada, that you were authorized to work during that time. The applicant may also carry out the activities listed in the lease statement of the NOC, substantial number of the main duties. Okay, so I'm not sure why we put that one in there, but so remember I was saying, like, you could apply as a plumber, or sorry, get a job offer as a plumber and submit work experience that isn't as a plumber. That's perfectly fine. You could, say, oh, I worked as a, I don't know, food service supervisor for a year, and because the skill levels equate, that would be fine for your work experience. But we also need to be satisfied that you can do the job you're being offered. So we need to make sure that you're able to be a plumber. Okay, so it doesn't mean you have to have the work experience in that job, but we still have to be satisfied that you can do the job you're being offered. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is what I was talking about before. So there is a qualifying work experience exemption for international graduates. So work experience is not required for applicants who obtained an eligible program credential from a post-secondary program, and you were enrolled as a full-time student during the entire program while you obtained the credential. That you obtained it within the 18 months prior to applying to us for IRCC for permanent residence, and you were physically present in Sudbury for at least 16 months during the 24 months immediately prior to obtaining the credential. So if you're an exchange, let's say you got most of your credits at a different learning institution, but you graduated from Cambrian, you may not qualify. You'd have to look at these rules to see if you'd still qualify. Okay, but really, it's meant it has to be a 2-year program or higher, unless it's in a master's or PhD program. Okay. So like I said, most of you, if you graduate from anything more than the 1-year diploma, like a 2-year program or higher, could benefit from this exemption where you wouldn't have to have the qualifying work experience. You still have to have a job offer, but maybe you don't have a full, like, oh, I've been offered a job as a healthcare aide, but I don't have a full year's worth of work experience. That's okay if you've graduated from this local DLI, because you'll be exempt from the experience requirement. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay. This is really, I think Alex will talk about it a lot as well, but it's also important. It's really the basis of the whole program. Remember how I said right at the beginning, if you don't plan on staying in Sudbury, this program is not for you, right? So it's what we call intent to reside. So intent to reside must be shown by the applicant is based on information available at the time of assessment. We just want to make sure that you really are planning on staying in Sudbury, that you're not going to be, oh, I want to apply for permanent residence, and then as soon as you become permanent resident, you leave for Toronto or Montreal or anything like that. That's really, there are other pathways that allow you to do that, just not RNIP, okay? And often a way to determine whether or not you're sincere and genuine in your intent to remain in Sudbury will be done by the community, like by Sudbury's Economic Development Organization, through the way of an interview. Next slide, please. Okay. Okay, so this is actually my last slide. So I'm actually going to go over what we've talked about. So basically, federally, we have what we call eligibility requirements. I'm not going to go, I mean, if you see our other presentation on other pathways, economic pathways, they're going to talk about what we call admissibilities. And that's any permanent resident program. They're on top of these, what we call eligibility requirements. We also want to make sure that, we do a criminal background check and that you're not a security risk to the country and that you've done a medical so that you're not a health risk to public health and safety in the country. But those are what we call admissibility, and what we're really, which you would have to complete, but everyone does. But really what we're focusing on are eligibility. And for RNIP, the eligibility requirements, I'll just recap them. They were, you have a job offer, you have a certain language level, you have a certain education level, you have a certain skill level, you have a certain work experience, and you have a certain amount of If you're not working, you have a certain amount of settlement funds. You intend to reside in the community. You get a community recommendation. You have a certain education, which is at least the equivalent to Canadian high school, and you have work experience, right? And if you meet all of those, or if you meet all those that you need to meet and are exempt from those that you're exempt from, you can apply to the Economic Development Organization in Sudbury. They can give you a recommendation if they feel that you're a good fit, and then you apply to IRCC for permanent residence. Okay, so this last slide, remember I said everything has to be valid in terms of, let's say, your language scores, and if you were getting an education credential assessment, that has to be valid. Also, at the time we receive our application, the only, I guess, exception to that is when you apply for a recommendation, the one thing where we will lock in there is the age of your dependent children. So again, I don't know how many of you, or maybe some of you have some older children, but if you did, you can remember I was saying how spouses and children can be part of your application. I shouldn't have said all children, because you could be very old and have adult children and they would not be part of your application. So any children that are under the age of 22 can be part of your application. So the one area where we will lock in that date, where you applied for a recommendation versus when you applied for permanent residence, is with respect to dependent children. So let's say you have a child who's 21 and a half years old. You don't think you're going to be able to apply to IRCC before they turn 22, but you're able to apply for a recommendation before they turn 22. Then those children can still be part of your permanent residence application if you were to be approved for a recommendation, even if they were older than 22. Keeping in mind that the recommendation itself has an expiry date, and you would have to submit your application to IRCC before the recommendation expires as well. So I hope that all makes sense. I know it makes sense to me because I've been dealing with this program for years now. But after Alex is done, if you have any questions or you need any further clarification, I'll be more than happy to answer them if I'm able to. So I will now pass it along to Alex.
That's great. Thanks so much, Scott. Before I begin, just because I'm kind of moving into a new presentation now, I'd like to also do a land acknowledgement. So just would like to recognize that I and I'm sure many others on this call right now are gathered on Robinson Huron Treaty Territory, traditionally shared by the Tikmashing Anishinaabe and Wahnapitae First Nations. So thank you very much for the federal outline of the requirements for the RNIP. The second half of the webinar will be focused on the community priorities. And if anyone's interested, you can visit the website directly at investsudbury.ca/RNIP, and it'll bring you right to the RNIP community information. So I'm going to talk today about some of the things that Scott had mentioned around intention to reside. And so we have different categories on our assessment form that capture that. So there's 3 different categories. There's human capital primary applicant section of the assessment form, the spouse or common law partner section. So candidates who are applying to the RNIP can also claim points for an accompanying spouse, as well as the final an important section, knowledge of the community and intention to reside in Sudbury. So let's talk a little bit about the form. So we actually have just revamped this form in May of 2021. We've added some new categories to the form. We've updated it quite significantly. So there's been a lot of changes. If you are familiar with the old form, I'd really suggest that you take a deep dive into the new one, because there are a lot of changes that would affect many applicants to the RNIP program. So the first section under human capital for the primary applicant, we've basically the form is meant to capture all of the points that you might be eligible for when applying to the community. So this includes things like your age. So there's a minimum and maximum of points that you can claim for your age, depending how old the primary applicant is. There's a scale here. So whenever you see a scale, or if you're looking for more information on each category, at the bottom of the form, there's a full description of each section. So there's details on how you can claim those points and whether you'd be eligible. Language skills, so whether you speak English or French, with an overall score of CLB or NCLC 6 or higher, you could claim 15 points for that. It has to be an overall score of 6 or higher, though. Education, so this is something that we've added. In addition to the language skills, that's a new category we added this year. Education as well, so if you do have a 2-year Canadian diploma or higher, or if you don't have a Canadian diploma, but you can show an education credential assessment with equivalence, you can claim 15 points. Related work experience. So that was something that we've always had on our form. If you have 1 to 5 years of work experience, you can claim of similar work experience relevant to the occupation you're applying in. It doesn't have to be in the same NOC code, but it doesn't have to be relevant. You can claim 15 points. And if you have more than 5 years of work experience, you can claim 25 points. This is a new one here we've added, is the wage category. So if you're earning over $20 an hour, you can claim an additional 25 points. If you're earning over $30 an hour, 50 points. And we've also added this here. So because of our Community Development Corporation strategic plan, it really focuses on mining, supply, and services, as well as the mining industry and tourism. So those are some priority industries in which candidates can claim more points for. So if you're working in mining, supply, and services, or tourism, you can claim 50 points there. The next category is knowledge of both official languages. So that's if a candidate speaks both English and French, and they can demonstrate that, they'd be eligible for 50 points. And then there's a subtotal here. We also have priority occupations. So this is an opportunity to claim an additional 100 points depending on the occupation. There are only 3 priority occupations at this time. So that includes transport truck drivers, as well as PSWs and nurse aides. We do have a cap on that right now. So it's 10 per occupation per year. Right now, there is still capacity for each occupation. And just moving on to the human capital spouse section. So if you are applying to the RNIP and you have an accompanying spouse or common law partner as part of your application, of course, if they're a Canadian citizen, they would not qualify for both for points in the assessment or for any other factor on this form. So they would need to be accompanying under your application. So we have language levels for the spouse. If they have CLB 4 or NCLC 4 or higher, or in all 4 language skills, they can claim 30 points. Or if it's in 3 out of 4 language skills, so let's say they have it for listening, reading, speaking, but they don't have it for writing, they don't meet that requirement, they could still claim 20 points. Knowledge of both official languages. So similar to the previous category, if a spouse speaks both French and English, they can claim 50 points. Spouse's work experience. So we did increase this from 10 to 20 this year. And so that's if your spouse has related work experience in an occupation or industry that's eligible. Spouse's employment status. So if your spouse is currently working either full-time or part-time in the community. And then spouse's employment status in a priority industry. So if a spouse is working in mining, supply, and services, or in tourism, there would be an additional 50 points there. Okay, and then that brings us to the final category, knowledge of the community and intention to reside in Sudbury. So we have a number of things here that would really allow candidates to claim points based on whether they're living in Sudbury and their experience in Sudbury. So that includes past studies in Sudbury, for which many Imrian College graduates would qualify for, I'm sure. So 15 points there. Experiential learning opportunity while studying. So if a candidate completed an internship or a placement, a 6-week placement, something like that, they can earn another 15 points. Experience living in a community with a similar climate. So this is something we added this year. So if someone's applying and country of origin has a similar climate, particularly in the winter, of course. So we focus on the months of December to February. And if the average temperature is below 0 degrees, that's what we define as a similar climate, particularly for the winter. They can claim 30 points there. Volunteer community involvement in Sudbury. So if you're part of a volunteer organization, it could be a church, it could be a community group, it could be a sports group, anything like that. We would ask for a letter of reference from an individual within that organization. You can claim another 25 points. Relatives in Sudbury. So if you have relatives in Sudbury that are Canadian citizens or permanent residents and have been here for 2 years or more, there's an opportunity to claim points there. And then the next one would likely not be relevant in this case, previous visit to Sudbury, but more so current resident of Sudbury. So if you're currently living in Sudbury and you have for the last eight months or more, you can claim 100 points. So that's it for the knowledge of community intention to reside category. Basically, what we do is then we would ask you to sum up those 3 categories for a total here. And we have a minimum cutoff that would apply. So if you're applying to the program with a spouse or common law partner, the minimum cutoff would be 95 points. And then if you're applying without a spouse or common law partner, if you're single, it would be 75 points in order to be considered for the RNIP program. I should mention that at that point, what we have in Sudbury is a draw process. So we basically, the amount of candidates that we have that apply are then put into a pool. And of course, we would select the highest scoring candidates that would come forward first, and then we would work down the list in some cases, depending on points that were scored. Okay, so for eligible occupations, we do have a wide range of eligible occupations in Sudbury. As you can see here, and Scott talked about NOC codes a little bit earlier, but this is an entire NOC category, so NOC code 0. That includes any type of management occupation that would qualify through the RNIP program. NOC 1 and 2 categories would qualify. There's some specific occupations under NOC 3 and NOC 4. Including nurses' aides, early childhood educators, NOC 4212 social and community service workers. And then there's some specific occupations under NOC 6 as well, including chefs and butchers. And then NOC 7, 8, and 9 are open at this time as well. A lot of these occupations are under the mining supply, mining industry. Okay, and then we also do have an open NOC category. So for other high-skilled occupations that are not listed, that are not on the list, they may be considered on a case-by-case basis. So we do have a cap right now of 15 per year. In that case, it's a bit of a different process. It's more of an employer-led process. So we would ask that the employer provide additional information regarding the positions, the difficulty in filling those positions, job vacancy requirements, things like that. As well as it involves a diversity assessment that would be completed with myself and our local immigration partnership coordinator.
Alex, sorry to interrupt. So when you say other high skilled, so is it limited to NOC B or higher, or do you have how do you qualify?
We don't have a specific cutoff, but that would likely be occupations that would be considered in that case. Yeah. And I mean, with the pandemic too, it really could change things. I've heard certain occupations that employers are having a lot of difficulty filling locally that maybe they never would, would have 2 years ago. So that really does affect things too. In terms of industry requirements, so this is another change that we made this year. So for folks that were familiar with the RNIP last year, we did have specific industry requirements that were placed for, especially for international applicants. So someone wasn't currently living in the community. At at this time, we don't have that requirement anymore. So anyone applying in any industry can apply, can come through the RNIP program. Before it was that if they were living abroad, they would have to be working in either mining or mining supplying services or tourism. So that's no longer a restriction. I just wanted to highlight that. But also to note that additional points are available, as I mentioned on that form, for applicants and their spouses who work in the mining supplying service or tourism industries. Okay, and then I just want to touch on the employment offer requirements here. So I think Scott may have mentioned this too, but one of the main requirements is, of course, that the job offer is full-time and permanent with an indeterminate duration. So absolutely no end date in sight. It's not a contract position. The employer has to be active in active business in Greater Sudbury for at least 1 year prior to providing the candidate a job offer. So at this time, if it was a startup and they haven't been in the community very long, the employer wouldn't qualify. The wages within the range of wages identified by the federal government, so that's already been touched on earlier. The employer must be confident that the individual can reasonably carry out the functions of the job offer, as demonstrated by past experience, interviews, and reference checks. And of course, the employer did not receive any form of payment in exchange for the job offer. So that one seems like a given, but I need to mention that here too. Okay, and then I just wanted to touch on the draws as well. So I mentioned the draw process earlier. Depending on candidate scores, they're put into the draw, into the pool, and then selected. So this summarizes our draws, our most recent draws, which are posted on our website as well. Excuse me. As you can see, in April, our draw cut off. The lowest ranking applicant was had 240 points. In recent months, that cutoff has gone down, however. So if you do see a draw cutoff on the website, I don't want it to discourage anyone from applying because it changes constantly. Right now, we do have capacity in the program. So, and you know, for a time we were getting caught up, and we're caught up now. So if you see the most recent draw cutoff of 150, it doesn't necessarily mean that you won't qualify if you apply with 140 points. It's just to give you a sense of what typical applicants were scoring in the past. I would really encourage candidates to consider applying if they meet that minimum cutoff or higher on that form. Okay, and then it comes down to how to apply. So, of course, check if you're eligible first, and Scott touched on that too, just to make sure that you meet those federal eligibility requirements first and foremost. Visit investsudbury.ca/RNIP. And if you go to the candidate section of that page, it will show you a detailed step-by-step process on how to apply, including step 5, which outlines exactly which forms we would need in order to put you in the pool to review the application. So that includes the SRNIP 001 candidate assessment form, which I just went over, the IMM 5911, and there's links on our website to each of these federal forms. The 5984 form, and that's an offer of employment form, which would need to be signed by both you and, well, it need to be completed by your employer and signed by you and your employer. The SRNIP 003 form, so that's an employer eligibility form. It asks the employer to verify that they've been in business for at least 1 year, and some of those other eligibility criteria that I mentioned. As well as supporting the documentation. So we do ask that, this is different from our previous process. Now we ask that candidates just submit everything up front so that we can just assess it. It really helps to streamline the process. So if, you know, because we have to verify that you're eligible at the federal level, we have to review your language skills and credentials, your education credentials, work experience information. So we do ask that you just send that all so that I can look at the ECA, I can look at the certificates, the language tests and things like that. Okay, and then this just gives us a summary of the process. So we've got a bit of a flow chart here. First, verify your eligibility, submit the documents to move to Sudbury at sudbury.ca. You would then enter the candidate pool. we would conduct the draw. After drawing, we would review all of the documents. We may request additional information if we're not satisfied with what's been provided. Undergo an interview. So Scott talked a little bit about that. We do interview our candidates, and we want to get a sense of what you like about the community, how long you've been in Sudbury, why do you want to stay in Sudbury, what's keeping you here, things like that. So as Scott mentioned, it's really an immigration program for people who want to reside long term in the city and contribute to the city. So that's what we're getting a sense of there. After the interview, we do bring those results and discuss each candidate's application with our community selection committee. And if the committee is satisfied, then we would issue a community recommendation. And then after that point, that's when the candidates can apply for permanent residency. And if needed, a work permit as well. So the work permit is LMIA exempt. It's often not required for international student graduates because they would likely already have that open work permit. But if it is needed, or if a work permit needs to be extended or renewed, then that could be that's definitely an option. Okay, so that's it for my part of the presentation. For more information, as I mentioned, you can visit our website. And if you have any questions at all, you can reach out to us at movetosudbury@sudbury.ca. And open to answering any questions. And as Scott mentioned, you can answer questions as well on the federal side.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Thank you for both of you for this presentation. We have many questions in here. We will go using the chat to go with the questions. And some of them might be related to Cambrian College, some of them might be related to you, Alex, or some of them might be related to Immigration Canada, so to Scott. So, and I will only read the questions, right? The first question that I see here is, do I need IELTS to apply for post-graduate work permit? The answer is no. You can apply for post-graduate work permit without the IELTS. But if you were graduate from Cambrian College, it doesn't mean that you have the proficiency level. That will be going a question for immigration, or for you, Alex. Just to give you an idea, Marcel, that question comes even from students who come from Jamaica or Bahamas or the United States. Do you have to take an English test? Yes, you have to take an English test to Canada, or French if you want to become a Canadian resident in the French community area. And job offer is proved from job letter. That's a question I have from Antonella. I guess she's asking if a job offer is the same as a job letter.
So I'll take that. I mean, Alex could take it also. So in one of the documents that Alex even listed as how it's part of the application to get a community recommendation, it's the IMM. Alex, help me out. So it's an official Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada form. So, I mean, the job letter is fine, but in addition, you must include an IMM. What's the number, Alex?
It's 5984.
5984. So, yeah, so that's very important. It's not enough just to have kind of a letter. You need to actually have that form filled out.
Okay.
Yeah. And that form really outlines what the employer is committing to under the RNIP program specifically. So it's about a 5-page form.
Okay.
With signatures.
Great. There is not much information about when the application starts. I also want to know how long the application process takes. Also, if an employer does not want to fill the form, can the employer write an introductory letter? There are 3 questions, by the way. There is not much information when the application will start. So I guess the application you can start application now, right?
That's correct. Yeah, so we're taking applications on a rolling basis. Candidates can apply today, next week, next month. The program is in place until the end of December 2022. In terms of the processing times, so on our end, I would say about 2 to 3 weeks at this point. Like I said, we're caught up right now. So if we receive a complete application, that is, if there's no additional information that we need from the candidate. We have all of their language test information, their education credentials, and everything, and we're satisfied, and we can do the interview with the candidate, and they qualify on every level. Then yeah, of course we can process it fairly quickly. I would say maybe 3 weeks.
Yeah. The other question is also, is the employer does not want to fill the form, can the employer write a letter?
No.
Okay.
It's a definite. I mean, it's a straight answer. No.
It's a yes or no, right?
Yeah. And then if I can go back to the other question, so from when, let's say, Alex can process the application for recommendation in a couple of weeks. Now with that recommendation letter, they typically right now, and this might change, the candidate would apply to IRCC on a paper application. So it's going to be a stack of documents that they courier to Sydney, Nova Scotia. Okay? From when we receive it, we're typically getting them decision rendered within 12 months. So that's actually fairly, not quite as fast as express entry, but certainly faster than provincial nominee, for example. So it's, I'd say, somewhere in between. Now that was before COVID, but things are actually ramping up. Our processing times for RNIP applications are usually within that 1 year time period. Yeah.
Scott, I just have a follow-up question because of that. Because if the candidate applies for under the RNIP recommendation, and then the candidate needs a work permit, because if you start working today and let's say the work permit ends, I don't know, maybe 6 months from now, how can he work? He will get an application for work permit extension or something, right?
So that's a fantastic question. So it all depends, right? So again, I didn't really get into the work permit side because my assumption was most Cambrian graduates would have a postgraduate work permit.
Yeah.
If, for example, they only did a 1 year diploma, so they only got a 1 year postgraduate work permit, right? Mm-hmm. And now, again, they got a recommendation, they applied for permanent residence, but their open work permit's going to expire in a month from now, and they still haven't had a decision rendered on their permanent residence. Mm-hmm. It's a great question, Marlon. So now they are entitled to an LMIA exempt work permit under the RNIP. So their employer would have to, I mean, it's a bit of a process. Their employer goes into what's called the employer portal. They create an offer of employment in this separate portal, which allows now the applicant to apply for a work permit extension that would not require a labor market impact assessment.
So in other words, they can get an extension or a work permit to stay in Canada, working in Canada by the time they get their PR.
Correct. Correct. Okay. Absolutely. But I would say that there's no need, if they have a lot of validity on their current work permit, there's no requirement for them, I want to switch from a postgraduate to an RNIP work permit. But yes.
I don't think they want to do that anyway.
Exactly. No, that's a great question. And yes, there's absolutely that mechanism in place so that if they were here working and they were accepted or given a recommendation, they will be able to bridge up until their permanent residence is approved.
Okay, great answer. The hourly wage is before or after taxes?
It's an hourly wage, so it would be before taxes.
Before taxes. Yeah. Okay. Okay. By the way, for those who are asking the presentation, it will take us maybe a week for us to be ready for the documents, and then we're going to send you. Plus, you will still have the access to the RNIP email, and then they will follow up with you too with the presentation. And when we apply for RNIP, our family's member must be in Canada because COVID-19, they cannot come to Canada.
So they do not need to be in Canada when they apply. So this is more, whether it's RNIP or not, when you apply for permanent residence and you have eligible dependents, you can either make them what we call accompanying or non-accompanying. Assuming you want them to become permanent residents sooner rather than later, you will mark them as accompanying. In that case, they're absolutely entitled to be added to the application. but depending, and this is really a more specific case by case, they may even be able to come here before the permanent residence is granted, but it depends.
It depends. The answer is
really
depends.
But the truth is even with the current travel restrictions, if someone now becomes a permanent resident, so let's say I'm a permanent resident, my family is abroad, now they're allowed to travel and they're exempt from the travel restriction.
Yeah.
But only once they become a permanent resident.
Yes. Okay. For RNIP program, it is required to study 2 years career to apply for permanent visa. I will assume she means permanent residency.
So no, I mean that's the whole thing. Again, you need to meet our education requirement. So that's either a Canadian credential of any kind, right? Or if it's an international credential, it needs to be assessed, through the ECA program. But it doesn't have to be 2-year career or anything like that. I mean, it really needs to be equivalent to Canadian high school.
Yes, Alex, just to give you an opportunity to mention this, Alex, remember that we are talking about points. At the end of the day, if the candidate happens to have, I don't know, 100 points, 200 points, 300 points, whatever the points they need, then they qualify, providing that they also qualify by the eligibility process that Immigration Canada has on the other side. So it doesn't really need to have 2-year diploma, 3-year diploma, or PhD or master degree. It depends on the points that you have, provided you qualify in the other aspects of Immigration Canada too. So what shall be presented? Well, this 1+1 program does not apply as 2-year program for this RNIP.
Okay, so I think I addressed that. So the 1+1 would qualify for the education requirement. Absolutely, that they wouldn't have to get an education credential assessment. They prove that they have a degree or diploma from a Canadian post-secondary. That's fine. What they wouldn't qualify for is the work experience exemption. So if I did a 1+1 and now I have a job offer, I still need to prove that I have 1 year relevant work experience, in the right NOC skill level.
Yeah, I do have cases of students who happen to be in their home country. They used to work in, I would say, project management. They study 1 year in Canada, and then they get a job in project management. Well, they already have the experience, so that credential of 1 year is still valid for these points, right?
Correct, provided that their work experience is within the last 3 years of when they apply. Yeah. So they can't use it. They can't use very old work experience.
Very old, yes, of course. And what shall be presented for proof of residency in Sudbury? What shall we do to account to start the residency as a student?
I'll leave that to Alex.
Alex?
So to prove that they're a resident in Sudbury and they're also a student currently? I mean, we would ask for anything that can show that, a driver's license that shows that they're living in Sudbury, as well as it could be a tenancy agreement that shows that when they moved here and how long they've been here. Sometimes it could include a reference, letter of reference from a landlord, for example. So, but those are 3 of the main ones.
Pretty much, if you rent a house or you buy a house in Sudbury, that's a document that proves that you live in Sudbury. Please notice that most of you will have a driver license, and the driver license has to have an address in Sudbury. So that would be another way to prove it. Will apply if we did 2 different programs. I guess this is the same question again, like a 1+1, right? How to apply? I think you already put the final page in how to apply. If we graduate from Cameron after and stay in another rural place in Canada, like Sault Ste. Marie, are we still eligible for RNIP? That's a question for you.
That's a question for me. Okay, so that's, again, Alex, close your ears. No. So you're allowed to apply under any program that you want to apply for. So like I said, if you qualify for Express Entry, you can apply for Express Entry. Let's say you have a job offer in Sault Ste. Marie. Okay? No one's stopping you from accepting that job offer. However, assuming you graduated from at least a 1-year diploma from Cambrian, you can use that again as your education requirement, but now you would need to prove work experience because you would only be able to use your graduating from Cambrian if you're applying to Sudbury if you want to use that work experience exemption. You can't go out to Vernon, British Columbia and say, oh, I want my work experience exemption, but I went to Cambrian. That won't go. That's not.
Yeah, because the whole purpose of this is having candidates or
retain
in the city, right? So that's the whole purpose of this.
Correct.
Okay. Correct. Okay. A friend of mine works in Valley. Valley is a company here in Canada, by the way. He said Valley is not considered an employer within Sudbury community in RNIP. But companies are not Sudbury local companies. Are there's a list? There's any list of Sudbury companies? That's a question for you, Alex.
Yeah, so there's not a list, but it's based on the geographical boundary. That particular company does fall within the boundaries of within the RNIP program. So the boundary is the census metropolitan area of Sudbury. So it does encompass it a little bit further out from the municipality too. There may be some employers that may not. It depends on the employer, and it all depends on whether or not they're willing to complete that form, that IMM 5984 form, to support their candidate through this process. Now, I mean, if Valley has an operation outside of the boundary, and that candidate's living and working at that external location, then no, then they wouldn't be eligible, right, Scott? They would need to be working for the Valley location in Sudbury.
Correct.
Okay. I am in 1-year program, and that might provide me 1-year work permits. Will I be eligible for RNIP?
Again, why not? I mean, there are people who are abroad who are eligible for RNIP. So again, I'm not sure what the question is asking. If they graduate from the 1-year program, again, they can use that as their education requirement, but they could not use it for their work experience exemption.
Work experience, okay. But it's very important that all of the audience understands that we're talking about, at the end of the day, we're talking about points. You might get some points in some areas, and you might not get points in another area. Let's say you speak French. Just because you speak French, then you will get more points, and so on, right?
But I'll say, Marlon, that's more for Alex's criteria. If you think of the federal criteria, it's pass-fail. Yeah. You either meet the requirement,
yeah,
or you don't meet the requirement.
Yes. But just to be sure in terms of immigration, IRCC, a person who has only 1 year or takes 2 programs of 1 year, do they still qualify for Immigration Canada, for IRCC?
For their education.
Yeah. Okay.
Not for the work experience exemption.
Okay. Cool. Those 20 hours. I mean, it says regarding similar climate, does study Sudbury for a year qualify for this 100 points?
Well,
go ahead, Alex.
I had the same question.
That's a good one. Well, so they would qualify for the 100 points, right? Because they've been living in Sudbury for a year. I think that would be a community with a similar climate. That's external of Sudbury, so that would be outside of the community that they're applying in. So yeah, but I mean, they'd get 100 points there, so they wouldn't really have to worry too much.
Yeah, if they just by living in Sudbury, you will get 100 points. So you were close to get it. Anyway, does $20 per hour wage can have 25 points?
You're on mute.
That's correct. Yes, that's right. So $20 an hour or more, they would be eligible for those 25 points.
Okay. I will be starting my studies in September. Do I have to wait to finish my studies before starting the RNIP process?
Okay, so this is a good question, only in that really this presentation was meant more for people who are coming to the end of their studies.
Yeah.
the RNIP program is a pilot program, and it's only going until. Do you guys hear me? Just because I see you're a bit frozen on the screen.
Yeah, go ahead. We can hear you.
You hear? Okay, perfect. Okay, so right now we're only giving recommendations out to the end of next year, right? So if someone just started, I guess they would, let's say, graduate in a year from now. Then they can use that as their education requirement. Now, again, this might not be popular for Cambrian, but if this person decided not to finish their studies here, but they had the right language levels and the right, work experience, and they had an education credential assessment from abroad that said they have at least Canadian high school, then they can apply today for a recommendation. No one should use graduation as being eligible for RNIP. It's a matter of, do you meet all of those pass-fail requirements? And if you do, you can apply as soon as you do meet those.
Yes, I'm glad that this question is coming, because remember that a couple of things why you want to study in Sudbury is because you will get the Canadian experience, you will get the possibility to get a job, and then you will get these academic credentials for you. However, as Scott mentioned, that you don't really have to. You can apply from overseas if you want to, or if you can. But the thing is that the likelihood for you to be connected with the right company, with the right kind of job, with the credentials that you need, with the Canadian experience, it will be limited. It is not impossible, but it's limited. Just a comment about this is, we have noticed that we have many students who have applied to Express Entry, and they ended up coming to Sudbury to study, because no matter how hard they try, they still don't make it because they're overseas. Hermes Perez, I like your question because your question is extremely deep. I would suggest you to send that question directly to the city. So I'm not going to get into that. Your question is very good, by the way, but I will recommend you to send your question directly to Alex in the city. Alex, would you please share your screen with the email address that you have? He has two very good questions, but I don't think this is the forum for those questions. Very good question, by the way. Can I change my program of study from certificate to master's? I guess that question comes to Cambrian College, and basically the answer will be no, unless the university you want to go accept or transfer from the certificate, which I guess the answer is no. But again, you can contact any university in Canada and say, you know what, I want to take a master degree, and you can go from there. It is a good idea to ask in the job interview if the employer is willing to help us before accepting the job.
I can't answer that. That's really a personal decision. I would say that's a personal decision. You also, and I understand the question. It's like, oh, why would I take the job for this person if they're not willing to provide me a job offer for RNIP? But at the same time, if it's a good job, maybe they want you to work for them for 6 months or until they feel you're committed to them. So I don't want to really speak on behalf of. I wouldn't say yes or no to that answer. It's up to the applicant.
Yeah. Okay. Is there any expired date for RNIP program? That's a question for you, Scott, I guess.
Yeah. So like I said, right now there's an expiry date for when Alex can provide a recommendation. So right now it's the end of December 2022. So presumably you'd have to apply to Alex or to Sudbury, by October or November 2022. If you get a recommendation, the recommendation itself has a 6-month validity, which means you would have to apply to IRCC before the recommendation expired. So I hope that makes sense.
Okay.
But again, keep in mind, and keep your eyes open to the news. Very often, and it hasn't happened yet, but very often a lot of our pilot programs do get extended. Yeah. So for example, the Atlantic immigration pilot, was a 3-year pilot, but then it got extended, and now it's actually, so it got extended for 2 years, and now it's being, transformed into a permanent program. But as it stands right now, the end of 2022.
Okay. For international students currently not in Canada, does job offer requirements still apply?
Oh, must. It's the most important part of the whole application. Without a job, there's no RNIP.
And that comes back to the concept before. The easiest way for you to get a job offer is that you are in front of the employer here in Canada. It's very hard for you to get a job offer when you are overseas. Not impossible, but it's very hard. What is the process time for RNIP, Scott?
Yeah, so
no,
again...
Alex, I'm sorry, that question is for Alex. What is the process time for RNIP?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so on the community side, it'd be about, I'd say about 3 weeks for us to process fully complete applications. And then if the candidates issued a community recommendation, they can then apply for their permanent residency. And as Scott mentioned, that would take an estimated under 1 year, I think is the goal for that. And then, of course, they also have an option to apply for a work permit once they submit their PR application.
Okay, it is really a challenge to get community recommendations.
Yeah, I mean, so right now, like I said, we're really caught up on applications. As I showed on the presentation, the candidate draw, like the number for the draw cutoff has decreased over the months. So I'd really encourage anyone to apply. It comes down to eligibility on the federal side as well as community eligibility, and whether or not they can demonstrate that intention to reside. So I think it's really candidate specific. But I mean, that being said, no, I don't. I think that we've brought a lot of successful candidates through the program now. So I really encourage people to consider this.
Okay. For a candidate who lives in Toronto, resides in Toronto, and study online in Cambrian due to COVID, would you please, guys, can you mute the candidate, the participants, please?
So I can answer that question.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so again, I understand that it's a very vague question. So if he graduates online from Cambrian, right, he can use that towards the education requirement. But for the work experience exemption, it's very clear that they need to reside in Sudbury, for the 16 or 18 months prior to the 24. So if they completed everything in Toronto online, they would not qualify for the work experience exemption.
Yes, and just to be clear, please be careful when you use the due COVID, because due COVID, you could be in Sudbury.
Correct. So
because
if you're
the argument, I am not in Sudbury because of COVID, I think it's the other way around, because COVID has less chances for you to get COVID than if you're in Toronto. I don't see the argument here. It will be hard to prove in Canada that you didn't move to Sudbury because COVID. Like you made a decision to live in Toronto. I'm not sure why, but then that's one thing. And then that, as Scott mentioned, you're eligible for the academic part, but you might not be eligible for the experience part. I have 1 year post-graduate permit in Sudbury. However, I have not work experience. I am eligible to apply for Sudbury program.
I'm not seeing that question in the chat. Is that something separate?
Some people send the questions to me directly. I have no idea, but
okay. So can you repeat that, Mark?
I have 1 year post-graduation work permit. I'm sorry. I just have 1 year postgraduate or graduate certificate studying in Sudbury. However, I do not have experience. I am eligible to apply for Sudbury program. I guess they mentioned Sudbury program.
Yeah, they're not eligible.
So they need to get a job here and work for 1 year and then apply.
Correct. Or if they worked part-time while they were studying, they just have to make up those hours, the 1,560 hours.
They're still eligible, but they need to get some other points somewhere else, like work in Canada, right?
They're not exempt from the work experience. I guess that's my answer.
How Cambridge College will help our RNIP application process? Okay, I love this question, and because help us to clarify something. By law, we cannot get into any application of any student, not even for postgraduate work permit, RNIP, express entry, or any other form for you to become Canadian resident. We give some guidelines in terms of postgraduate work permit, and yet we don't help in the process for you to apply for postgraduate work permit. And in terms of RNIP, I guess you can send questions to move to Sudbury at sudbury.ca, and you can ask questions directly to them, or in any case, Immigration Canada, if you have any question about it. But we as a college, as academic institution, in fact, as academic institution in Canada, no academic institution gets involved in your application to become Canadian resident. That's by law. That's the requirement. That's the way it is. And but I like that question. I love that question. After receiving postgraduate work permit, how long do we need to wait to apply for PR?
If you're sorry, if you're eligible to apply, you can apply.
But for the record, guys, if you're eligible to apply today for PR, go ahead and apply today. You don't have to wait. The thing is that chances are you will not have enough points to make it through express entry, either because of whatever points you need, or you might not have enough points to apply for RNIP if you are not in Sudbury, or if you're studying here, or something like that. But again, these are a meritocratic system, so you have to have the point for you to apply. Okay, after receiving, so you can apply anytime. For current Cambridge students who are in Ontario College Graduate Certification Program, 1 year with a third semester placement period, 2 months, is it no. They're asking if the co-op permit, they have 2 semesters classes, and then they have 1 semester of internship. They're asking if the internship is valid for RNIP experience. What do you think, Scott?
Okay, so again, if they mean RNIP work experience, if they were paid and they were authorized to work in Canada, you can use that. So there are certain programs, I know, like I think maybe like Canadian Experience class, where it doesn't let you use your co-op experience towards work experience. That's not the case for RNIP, provided you were paid and you were
paid,
right?
Please.
And that's very important. Very important.
Thank you for mentioning that, because most of our internship are not paid.
Then it would not qualify.
So they don't qualify. We have a couple programs, actually 1 program that you get paid during your internship, but that is only 1. So I would say basically you don't qualify under that concept. Please answer my question. I'm a full-time student. I need to extend my study permit. I already in Canada. Do I need a valid IELTS test to start? No, I think we answered that question already. You don't need an IELTS test to apply for study permit extension. If we study a program of 2 years, but we study 2 programs of 1 year each, can we apply? I think you already answered the question, Scott. Would you like to answer it again?
Again, yes, you can apply. Anyone can apply.
Okay.
If we're talking, I guess when it comes to education, there's an education requirement. I know I'm repeating myself a lot. If you graduate with a Canadian credential, that satisfies, again, remember I was saying pass-fail, it satisfies the education requirement. If you're looking for your Canadian education to make you eligible for the work experience exemption, it must be at least a 2-year diploma or degree.
Okay. If you're exempted for work experience, do you automatically get the score for work experience?
If you are exempted from work experience, you automatically get the scores. No. I mean, that's So good. So again, I think it's twofold because Alex, I guess you give points for work experience, correct? So if you're exempt from work experience, you don't need to prove that to the federal side because you're exempt. But if Alex is giving points for work experience, my assumption is you need to work to get work experience points.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm wondering if the question is because they had the exemption because they studied, but they also had that like 5 years or more of work experience. In that case, would they get the points? Is that the question?
I'm not sure. Would you mind to elaborate more, right? If a student gets 1 year post-graduation work permit after 1 year of study and goes back to study visa, can they apply for PR before the expiration of the study permit? Well, that is a tricky question. Go ahead, Scott.
Again, I don't want you guys to think that again, think of everything as a pass-fail test. Do you meet the education? Yes? Perfect. Do you meet the job offer? Yes? Fantastic. Do you meet the work experience? Yes? Terrific. If you meet all, and then you apply for a recommendation. If you get a recommendation, you can apply. It doesn't, maybe you're onto your 5th degree, right? And you're kind of waiting to see your prospects for PR. And in the meantime, you want to, further your education. You can do that too, right? But just keep in mind that if you're going to apply, and again, you have to apply to Sudbury first. If you're going to apply to Sudbury, you want to make sure that you meet all of the federal eligibility criteria. Does that answer the question?
I guess, I hope so. I'm going to start in September. Cambridge College cannot apply for RNIP. Well, we already mentioned that. Does study time in Sudbury qualify for current resident in Sudbury? No, Fatima. I think you're trying to find a way to say, I am sitting in Toronto, I am sitting in Vancouver, but I study in Sudbury. No. The academic part is okay, but the time in Vancouver, in China, and in India, in Guatemala, that doesn't count for time in Sudbury. You have to live in Sudbury to qualify for living in Sudbury experience.
Marlon, I'm assuming you have a lot of, I guess, online people, like
yes.
like distance learning. Okay,
that's why they're having this question, and we have some students who are living in Ottawa, in Vancouver, in
understood. Okay,
that's why they're having this questioning here.
Yeah, was that around the 100 extra points? Is that what the question is?
Yeah, they would miss those points, I guess, right? Because they're not living in Sudbury.
And they wouldn't meet the exemption, the work experience.
The work experience. If the offer made by company in mining sector is contractual position, will be one eligible?
Unfortunately, no.
No, okay.
Remember we said, and that's because it has to be full-time with no end date. So a contract has an end date.
Just to be conscious of the time, it's 3:32, is already 1 hour and a half. We will answer the following 10 more questions. Are you okay, Scott?
Yeah, I could stay. Yeah, I have no issues.
Oh, okay.
I just want to clarify though too on that contract require if it's a contractor that like if it's a contractor like that provides different contract services to different companies in Sudbury, that's different. So Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but in that case it would be eligible, right? If they're working for a contractor that does contract. I mean,
we could discuss this again, but again, if any contractor in particular, even if it is indeterminate, will not be eligible, right? So if I'm going through what we call like a job agency, so it's the job agency that's, is that what they mean, or?
I'm talking more like an engineering contractor that works for different mining clients, like that kind of thing. But they work for an engineering firm that's a contractor.
It depends. You know what I mean? Yes and no. So again, we'd have to discuss. So someone who's like a contractor, right? Generally, they're self-employed, right? They're kind of, which that experience doesn't, is not qualified, right? So, and here I'm just reading it as contractual position, meaning I'm giving you a contract. So unfortunately, if it's just a contract and there's an end date, then that job offer is not eligible.
Okay, I have the same question again. Abril keep asking the same question. She's asking the question in 3 different ways. This is the 3rd time she has the same question in a different way. But if I want to apply for RNIP, does it have to be 2-year program? The same question asked in a different way because she wants to.
I honestly, I don't even know what they're asking. Right? If you want to apply for RNIP and you meet all the eligibility requirements, then apply for RNIP. If you don't meet the eligibility requirements, then do not apply.
Okay, I will ask the question a different way. Let's say I want to study only 1 year.
Yeah.
And that's it. But then because I have the diploma of 1 year, grad certificate of 1 year, but I have all the qualifications, can I still apply for RNIP?
Of course.
That's it. So don't worry about this, Abril. You're asking the question 3 times in different way, which is good. Yeah. But I think you have the answer.
Provided that they have the work experience, right?
Yeah,
so
again, you qualify the other things. Yeah.
Correct. So it's that's the big one, right? So I think a lot of people want to know because if you have the work experience, then don't worry about the length of your Canadian program.
Okay, I'm skipping some questions because it is Marlon, Alex, Scott. How do you prove duration in residence Sudbury? Is housing rental agreement acceptable? I think Alex had already mentioned that you need to have the housing rental agreement, right?
Yeah, that's more of a. Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, to prove that they're a resident of Sudbury, I would say, yes, the rental agreement. If they're looking to claim those 100 extra points, then yeah, they would need to demonstrate that they've been there for. For that 8-month period. So that's what we'd be looking for, is just to show that they started that agreement 8 months ago or longer.
Okay.
I mean, if they're working for an employer locally and they've been working for them for a year, I mean, that's usually pretty obvious, and they have a local driver's license. So that could be sufficient too, I would think.
Okay. And if I already applied for express entry, can I still apply for RNIP?
Absolutely. So again, I'm not sure exactly what they mean by applied for express entry. Some people, when they create a profile, they think that's applying for express entry, but it's not really. It's creating a profile. To me, when someone says I applied for express entry, is because we, IRCC, has provided an invitation to apply. Now, if you've received an invitation to apply and you've done so, and you've already spent over $1,000 on an application, I would wonder what your reasoning to applying also through RNIP, when we know that it's going to take at least close to a year, and and we don't refund your money if your application So I'll say this: you're allowed to apply for permanent residence as many times as you like at the same time, but there are no refunds, and whatever one you are approved on first, you get approved, and then the others just get closed. Yeah. So it's usually the reverse. As I applied for RNIP, and now I've been invited to apply under express entry. Can I? Yes, you can. But again, there's a cost versus why. Like it's because you don't want to wait an extra few months, or. But I guess the short answer is you can apply for permanent residence under different pathways. There's nothing that stops you.
How long should the applicant live in Sudbury to apply? Same question again and again. You will get extra points in Sudbury. That's the point, right, Alex?
Correct. Yeah. So I mean, there's nothing stopping a candidate, if they're eligible, to applying, even if they don't get those extra 100 points, as long as they can still meet that minimum cutoff.
Okay, if I have an ECA, which equals to 2-year master degree in Canada, and want to study 1-year program in Cambridge, will both qualification qualify for me for both education and work experience?
Not the work experience.
Education, yes, no work experience.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we'll explain that again. Okay. Some people are asking for the video. We don't have the video. We don't record this. And is there any limitation of number of recommendations of community makes? If so, how often and how many in a year?
Alex, I can answer if you don't want.
So an indication on how many recommendations have been made or will be made?
Is there a limit on how many you're
limit.
allowed to issue?
Thank you. So yeah, so for the 2021 year, the limit is 150 recommendations that we can issue. And at this point, we've issued 51 recommendations.
Yes. There's a question here I need to clarify from my end, I guess. Right now, international students are not allowed to travel to Canada. Are the students online count for RNIP? I need to divide this question in two pieces. Number one, yes, international students are allowed to travel to Canada. I have no idea why the students saying that they're not allowed to travel to Canada.
It could be they're from India and we're not accepting.
Yeah, but in general terms,
yes,
the international students can come to Canada.
Absolutely.
They can come. What happens is that they have to follow some rules. They have to go to the hotel, vaccinations, and there's some things they have to do. So yes, you can come. Are the students online count for RNIP? Yes. The education online is valid for educational parts. Remember, but for the job experience, will not count. Can I take the IELTS test in Sudbury? I don't know at this point of time. I understand that Cambrian College used to give the IELTS test in Sudbury in facilities, but because of COVID-19, we don't have that anymore. Honestly, I don't have the answer for that one.
I recommend they just go to the IELTS website or the CELPIP website, and then they'll give dates of when and where it's being offered.
Yeah, the thing is that we used to give it in Sudbury. I'm trying to, but because of COVID right now, we don't have it. Okay. It is recommended to have 1,500 hours of work experience in Canada before applying. Scott?
I mean, not in Canada necessarily. It's 1,500 hours of the work experience to
1560.
1560. Yes, thank you. To meet that 1 year full-time requirement. So it could definitely be outside of Canada, though, as long as it's within the eligible occupations.
Okay.
And within that experience requirement for the eligible NOC A, B, C, or D, or sorry, 0 A, B. Yeah, 0 A, B, C, or D.
Yeah. Okay, the voluntary requirement, does a letter of NORCAT stating that I'm volunteering in the community garden count? Don't worry, somebody sent that email to me, like a message to me, like voluntary working in a company saying that they're volunteering in their community garden. Does that count?
I would think so. Yes. In order to claim points under that community involvement section.
Okay. I have prior experience in my home country as accountant in tourism industry. If I get a job as a business analyst in the tourism industry after studying business analytics in Cambrian College, does this qualify for employment status in a priority industry?
You're on mute, Alex.
Can you just repeat that one again?
I have prior work experience in my home country as an accountant in tourism industry. If I get a job as a business analyst in the tourist industry after studying business analytics in Cambrian College, does this qualify for employment status in a priority industry?
If it's an accountant job
in tourism,
yes.
And then the person comes to work in tourism here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would think so. Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, the work experience must have to be in Sudbury or can be foreign?
Is this for the related work experience on our assessment form? If so, yeah, absolutely, it can be foreign work experience or local. Yeah.
And even for federal, if you're, as long as it was within the last 3 years, foreign work experience counts towards the federal work experience criteria.
Okay, there's another question here. This is a good question, by the way. What is the application fee for the RNIP? Not for the residency application, but for RNIP, for you guys here in Sudbury.
Yeah, there's no fee for candidates to apply to the RNIP. Yeah, like you said, Marlon, there is that there's permanent residency processing fees
yes,
that need to be submitted.
But that is after the fact, right?
That's right.
After the person has been accepted by Sudbury and recommended by Sudbury. So the person applies for RNIP in Sudbury, that process doesn't cost any cents. But when they apply for permanent residency after they have their recommendation letter for RNIP in Sudbury, then that's a cost, right, Scott?
That's correct.
Okay. I don't see any NOC related to IT jobs like software developing. Is there any reason for this?
So I believe that would fall under not category 2, which is open. So if they are applying a software IT job, I think it would be 2 something. It would be a 4-digit knock under that category. So that would be eligible.
Okay, I am studying online in Toronto as a full-time student in Cambrian. Then I'm eligible for express entry and post-graduate work permit. Or is compulsory to live in Sudbury? I don't understand this question. If I am studying online from Toronto as a full-time student in Cambrian, then am I eligible for points in express entry and for post-graduate work permit? It is compulsory to live in Sudbury, to be in Sudbury. Okay, Alex, for the educational part, does the diploma from Cambrian College work for points for educational part? And the other question will be, if they live in Toronto but they don't live in Sudbury, will they get points by living in Sudbury, by living in Toronto? Because that's pretty much the question they're asking. If I am studying online in Toronto, because they're studying online in Toronto, they're not making points in Sudbury, I guess, right?
No, that's right. So if the past studies in Sudbury, they would need to be have resided in Sudbury for the duration of the program. So it's similar to the federal requirement. Okay.
Question to Scott, Alex, does the federal minimum settlement amount also apply RNIP? Federal skilled worker, Canadian business class. Oh, they're asking about the money.
The settlement funds?
Yeah, settlement funds.
Okay, so the settlement funds, if at the time they apply for permanent residence, so Alex won't ask about settlement funds. He's not supposed to. He's not supposed to assess. He may make people aware that they need settlement funds, but that's almost always only people applying from abroad. Okay, if you are working in Canada, when you apply for permanent residence, you're exempt from proving settlement funds.
Another question, can a spouse and children of international students allowed to visit at this time? I think
not really. It's not an RNIP question, is it?
Yeah, that's for you. Scott.
Again, it depends, right? So the short answer is no. Okay.
Yeah, let me clarify this.
Because you said visit, right?
Visit,
they said visit. So that's why.
If you want your husband to visit you, the answer is no. If you want your husband to come to work with you, then it depends. Because if Immigration Canada grants your husband the work permit, then he can come with you. That's pretty much the question, because you mentioned the word visit. It is the kind of, if you ask that question to an immigration officer at the airport, and you said, my husband has a work permit, but he just coming to visit, the immigration officer might say, okay, you know what, to visit? No. To work? Yes. Anyway, is there any place within Cambrian College that we can go for assistance related to process in case? Okay. Just to be clear again, somebody's asking again, we as a college, we as academic institution, we cannot get involved in your application for study permit, for post-graduate work permit or express entry or any transaction you do with Immigration Canada. We just cannot get involved. As much as we can, as much as we want, the most we can do is give you guidelines from post-graduate work permit or study permit extension or co-op permits. And yet, we cannot go into your application and help you to qualify. No, we just don't do that. We just cannot do that. In the case of RNIP, you can go ahead and contact RNIP again and again until you clarify your questions. I have a question for you that, by the way, Alex, that nobody asked, but I want to ask. Do the candidates need to have a lawyer or immigration consultant to apply for RNIP?
No, absolutely not. I mean, that's definitely an individual decision for each candidate, whether or not they want that support or want to pay for those services. If they do want a representative, they can follow the procedures through the IRCC website in order to find one that's certified, registered. But no, I mean that many candidates may choose to apply on their own, or they may choose to work with a representative. It's entirely up to them.
Okay, I am sorry, friends. I have to go. I have another appointment right now. And thank you, Alex, for your time. Thank you, Scott, for your time. It has been very lecturing. We learned a lot. And if you have further questions, you can go ahead and ask a question directly to the RNIP. Would you mind to share the last time the email so they can take a picture of that email, please? I'm sorry, Alex, keep asking the same question again. If you want to have questions about RNIP, please send those questions or to investsudbury.ca RNIP, and that would be the best place for you to ask those kind of questions. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Scott. It has been a pleasure for us to have you, an honor for us to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Very much.
Thanks for organizing this, and yeah, like you said, happy to answer questions. Move to Sudbury at sudbury.ca.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend.